Yeah. So, okay. So today's episode is going to be all about injuries in the collegiate athletic sphere. So, we're going to talk today about injuries that we've both had through our college careers, how we deal with them or how we dealt with them, and how you can prevent them and what treatment and rehabilitation looks like. Little asterisks here, neither of us are doctors or medical professionals of any sort. And so, just take anything that we say with a grain of salt. Obviously, make sure you go and talk to your either the sports doc who's on campus, or if you have access to a team doctor or something. If you're in the professional sphere, this is obviously a great resource to have. But really go and consult the medical professionals. But we just want to talk about maybe some of the things surrounding the injuries that we've had, and maybe some of the mental barriers to getting back into playing, and really kind of focus on that like mental challenge of being injured when you're constantly surrounded by other student athletes who are killing it and doing some really cool stuff. So why don't we just really quick brief overview? And do you want to go through your sort of injury history within the 4 to 5 years you were in the collegiate athletic system?
Yeah, so for my 3 years at Gonzaga, first season made it out with just ankle sprains. Second season missed a massive chunk of it for spraining my MCL. It was a grade 2. They assessed me on the field as having an ACL tear, which is something I'd already done. So I was that was um, quite a dramatic time. So that was my second year cut short because of that. And then my last season, concussion kept me out about half the season. So injuries were unfortunately a really big part of my collegiate career. That last year too was like my ankles were both sprained constantly. Um, so yeah, what about yourself?
I was pretty good freshman year. I had a little bit of an overuse injury in my groin, sort of like had sort of just re-aggravated a groin injury in and out, but I don't think I missed any game. I never missed a game because of it. It was always just like a niggling thing in training. Sophomore year was injury free. Not I was awesome. In between, at the very end of sophomore year, I was in the gym and sustained a hernia, a double hernia. So I tore both of my rectus abdominis, which are the big like ab muscles running top to bottom, off my pubic bone at the base. So that was extraordinarily painful, but it didn't get actually diagnosed until April or May of that year. And so I spent surgery and all of my junior season essentially on the bench and recovering in rehab and all that stuff. Senior year, totally injury free. So I've sort of I managed 3 out of 4 years to be pretty good. So that's kind of my history. But had a had a big foot break again in 20 or had a big foot break in 2020 that we can sort of touch on as well, and some of the things that I learned from that rehab process, because I was in the pro game as well, which is a little bit of a different mindset compared to the collegiate injury. Because as I'm sure you know, when you're injured in a college system, it's very easy to just cruise because your spot on the team is pretty much you're there for 4 years. And so
Yeah.
unless the coach is a total piece of work, you're not going to get kicked off the team because you're injured. It's more just like, okay, rehab. And then if you're good enough to play with us when you come back, great, no problem.
Yeah.
Whereas in the pro game, it's definitely a little bit different. So, yeah, maybe let's start with sort of mindset stuff. So when you had obviously you had already done your ACL prior to college. When you had that MCL injury your second year, what sort of the walk me through like the experience of sustaining that injury from the moment it happens to like what your brain's telling you during that time, and for the first like maybe couple days while you're trying to figure out like what the hell's going on.
Yeah, no, it was really, really difficult. So that was my senior year. So I was planning on that being my last season at Gonzaga at first. So that would have been 2 years in total I would have spent at the program. So basically this guy's, running down the field. I'm kind of like my teammate's kind of stopping him. He kind of like collides with my teammate, my leg straight. He runs straight through my leg. Feel kind of like that tingling sensation. Immediately, I'm thinking, that's kind of what I felt with the ACL. So, and if you've had a knee injury, you kind of know whenever anything happens to your knee, you're like, you're freaking out. And so, yeah, he assessed me on the field, told me he thinks it's my ACL. I'm really a hypermobile, so that's not the first time somebody's been like, "Oh, it's a little bit loose," but like, during that time, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just like, "Oh man." Obviously, really emotional when I get back into the locker room. Kind of was just trying to hold it in until I got there, and then got an MRI 3 days later. But like in that time leading up to that MRI, I'm kind of like, do I call it a day? Do I quit? Do I retire? Because I mean, what was I, 22 at that point? 22 or 23? And, that was supposed to be the year. And I was, just coming off a really good season with the Timbers 23s. But it's just like, oh man, it's like a year getting back, and your head's like all over the place when that's happening. It's just like a massive shift in what you think's going to happen. Then it comes back and they say it's an MCL, it's 6 weeks. That's like, oh my gosh, I was overjoyed. I made it back on the field in like, or no, it was 8 to 10 weeks. I made it back on the field in 6 weeks, and I probably should have spent more time out. So I came back probably like 75%. Definitely wasn't playing my best. Um, but like going through that rehab process, it's so hard because the seasons are so short. So like even if you have a 2 to 3 week injury, like your season's almost done. Like, and I could have medically redshirted, but like I didn't know if I was going to come back or not, so I decided not to. But yeah, those kind of injuries can be really, really tough, especially with soccer being built so much into your identity as who you are. Which, people always said that to me all the time. When I was younger and in college, like soccer is part of your identity. I'm like, I don't care. Like, yeah, whatever. But now looking back, you see like why those are such earth-shattering moments, because it's like, you know, what do I do with myself? Like, who even am I?
Mm.
So, um, yeah, that was my experience with the MCL. Luckily healed up. I've, my knee has always been kind of I've got some arthritis there now, so it's always gonna be a little jumbled up. But I always think that those kind of injuries also, when you look further down the line, are really great lessons where you can learn more about your body, what works for you, what doesn't work for you, how to manage it. Um, I don't think this is why it happened, but this summer league stuff is definitely a huge toll on the body as well. So it turns into like a not having any rest type of situation, which is I think where partly the reason why I was sustaining a lot of injuries in the fall was because I was having these USL2 seasons that were going straight into preseason. Um, so yeah, that was my experience with the MCL.
Yeah. Explain maybe, or I'm curious about the through those injury moments when you seem to have such a catastrophic view immediately of your career and should I retire? Like that's a pretty extreme. Like you go from I'm coming off Timbers U23 to all of a sudden you're like, is this it? Like this is it.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this could be whatever, whatever. As you go through more of those injuries, do you feel like that identity piece of you, like you're a footballer and that's all you are? Do you think that starts to separate as like I am who I am, and football is just one of the things that I do?
Mm. Well, I think that's something I'm still working on for
Okay.
sure. But I think to answer your question, no, I think I was still like, how do I keep me being a soccer player, still be a soccer player while I'm on crutches, while I'm doing this?
Mm,
And so I think that's where a lot of like suffering can come from, like internally, is how do I how do I keep being me even though I can't do what I am,
mm,
which is a really, strange thing to think about. I think now it's a little bit different because obviously I've had all these different injuries and experiences and kind of seen the importance of having a bit, I wouldn't say balanced life, but like just a bit more perspective on things. because at the end of the day, like most injuries you can come back from. And then there's some that you don't want to come back from. Maybe you have a skull fracture or something. You're like, all right, I'll probably just call it there. But most injuries, nowadays, like you can come back within a year, year and a half. So it's like, how much are you willing to, do the rehab and come back? And I think that kind of way of looking at it it kind of changes your mindset a little bit. Because it's not like, oh, I'm never gonna play again. Like you'll be fine. If you do the rehab, it's just gonna suck. But um, yeah, I think extracting the idea of who you are with like how you perform is kind of intrinsically tied into the injury part.
Yeah. What do you do to in that process to self-medicate
Well, I
mentally or
think,
physically?
yeah, um, I think the first few times I've had injuries like that, I think alcohol is definitely a thing that would be a way for me to kind of, I definitely use to try to like ease the tension in my mind, which obviously I don't think is like the ideal thing, but like I think it was for me at that time with such a catastrophic diagnosis that was like the only thing I could see my like I mean it was like earth shattering for me. But I think once I kind of got through that initial phase, or even when they told me it was the MCL, it was kind of like looking larger picture, like, okay, like where am I right now? Like where do I want to be? So I think that planning, kind of putting things into perspective was really helpful. And then also, um, I think also just like leaning on the support of your teammates and friends. Like, it's not that people aren't friends with you because you're, good at soccer. Like that's not the way it works. Like, because if you look back at your experiences at Whitman and, wherever, Flower City now, even for both of us, I don't ever look back and like think of somebody because of how good they were. I think about them as a person and like experiences that we had together. So, I and it's really easy to say that in hindsight, but I think that's another thing that I try to carry with me today. It's more about the person and character you are than what you necessarily do on the field.
And if it is something that I think in that example of Whitman or Flower City, the people who I really only know what they're like on the field as a player, that's the reason we're not friends outside of soccer.
Yeah,
And that's it. And
yeah,
that's okay, right? Like that's you don't have to
yeah,
be best friends with everybody, but
right.
I think your own judgment of yourself in those moments has to be, I am who I am. And the way I'm going to get through this is by discipline, by rehabbing correctly, all that stuff, and making sure that my self-medication tactic isn't going so far one direction that you put yourself into a hole deeper than you can crawl out of.
Yeah, 100%. For you, when you got that hernia, was that in the gym doing a specific exercise? Is that how it happened?
Yeah, so
Can you
sophomore
take me
year,
through that?
yeah, so sophomore year was an interesting one because I went from we had a coaching change between freshman and sophomore year, and so we had a new coach. The coach really liked me. I went from being recruited, so I played left back all throughout high school, played a little bit of midfield for the high school team, but like so does every top player, whatever.
Mm,
Um, but on my club team, I was a left back or a left winger, and that's like where I played. And so when we got to college, and my coach, my freshman year, Mike Washington, who's a wonderful human being, and he was a good coach too, I thought. Um, very old English style of play. And he had me playing the majority of the time as a midfielder, like as a center mid, as an 8 or a 10, and I was way out of whack. It was, whatever it was, right? So played there, had a blast, but was a little bit out of position. New coach comes in and goes, "Hey, I've looked at your highlight tape from high school and stuff. Like, where do you actually want to play?" And I was like, really, left back's kind of my thing. Like, that's where I play. Started every game under him for the rest of my life, basically, in Whitman College. So coming into a new position, I was super excited. I was training outside of team sessions. I was getting into that sort of like overuse kind of red zone area of my RPMs, so to speak, and took maybe 3 or 4 days off after the season ended and then was like right back into training, which I now know is like really not a good thing. But
Yeah.
back then it was like my body's elastic. I'm a Gumby basically, and I can do whatever I want. That's what it is. I was in the gym on off season in back in Seattle, and I was doing a exercise actually for my back, my lower, just to do some like strengthening for my lower back. Really, really simple, like bottom to top cable pull exercise. Very light. It was maybe 10 or 15 pounds. But because of the compounding of the overuse, rep number 8 or 9, literally it felt like pop. And I crumpled to the floor, the whole 9 yards. I was like, oh no, 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 no. So all this stuff. Then tried to get doctor's appointments. Doctors wouldn't tell me what it was. I got MRIs and they couldn't see anything. And I had to get like ink put in there to get the MRI because they were like trying to find the little tears. And I'd like the shot. What do you get? The shots of cortisone or whatever. So you get cortisone shots, all this stuff. Finally, over spring break, my sophomore year. And keep in mind, I'm stressing out because I know that if I have something is wrong and if I have to get surgery, it means I'm like the more time I wait, the more it's going to cut into my junior season. And I was flying sophomore year. I felt like I was playing so well, all this stuff. And so, of course, similar to you, right? Back of your mind is like, oh my God, like I can't play in front of all my friends and family anymore. I can't do this. I can't perform. I can't be a part of the team, blah, blah, blah. And there's sort of that imposter, like sort of a fake imposter syndrome that comes from being injured because you're like, I don't know if I should be in these team events if I'm technically not playing. It's like a very weird mental space to
Yeah.
be in. So I get diagnosed finally. One of the doctors at the Seattle orthopedic surgeons group, he went in and did the whole like, felt that area and was like, turn your head and cough, like sort of old joke.
Yeah.
And literally within 5 seconds was like, oh dude, you've got like a proper hernia. Like this is really bad. And I was like,
Yeah.
God damn it. And so he said, next week we'll get you in for surgery. And it ended up being like it was like 8 and 5 millimeter tears, like pretty significant tears on both
Wow.
sides. And so had the surgery, had the biomesh stuff put in on either side and started the rehab process. Couldn't couldn't really walk or sit up or have sex or like do anything for the first, month or month and a half or whatever. And then it was sort of build back into it really slowly over time because that area is just that's where a lot of strength comes from, right? Core is really, really important to everything. So I think for me it was yeah, and then I got playing time. I was able to play and got cleared like the last 2 games of the season and stepped in for a PK, scored a PK in my like one of the last 2 games, which was good.
Yeah. That's good.
Um, but yeah, it was one of those injuries and one of those moments where, as somebody who wasn't drinking, as somebody who didn't do drugs or like really socialize or party that much, it was extraordinarily. Um, I felt very lonely in a lot of places
Yeah.
because it was like,
What did
where do you
you,
fit in?
yeah. What did you use to cope with that? Or what did you do?
I don't know. Like I don't know if I did cope with it. I think I genuinely was like in my own head most of the time.
Right.
I think a lot of it was like I think I depended way too much on like a girlfriend at the time, and so it was like that was like the social release, and that was like, you know, whatever that was. And so I think I spent the majority of that period of time being unnecessarily dependent on those few people. And so like the ex-girlfriend and then, 1 or 2 of my other friends. And so that was that was probably a situation that I feel like I could have done better with. But I think my personality is such that I just almost try to forget and get stuck into the process. So like whatever I could do, whether it was sitting in the sauna for an hour every day to stay like as cardiovascularly fit as possible when I couldn't do
Yeah.
any movement, like whatever it was, my solution, compensation, my coping is always I'm just going to do like everything I possibly can to keep myself as active and as ready to go as possible.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I think that can be a coping mechanism in itself, is just, trying to take those tendencies of, I don't know if you would classify yourself as this, but for myself, like perfectionist tendencies, and then applying that into the rehab, which for rehab is good, but that the whole perfectionist thing is a whole nother, podcast we could do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a pretty radical. And were you able to play when you had the cortisone shots? Like, were you able to?
Yeah.
You were. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, and that's why I didn't get diagnosed either, was because it was like, well, you're keep playing, even though I was playing like in severe pain the whole time, even with the cortisone shots, it was like I can still kind of do stuff.
Yeah, man, that's a really tough injury. And then, how do you think you coped with that injury versus when you broke your foot? Because from the outside looking in, it looked like you took the broken foot like a absolute champ in terms of
Yeah.
figuring out different ways. Like, take me through that process and what that looked like. And
Yeah,
where were you
100%.
when it happened in terms of teams?
So I was in Australia. I was between seasons in Australia when I started to notice it. Sort of towards the end of my first contract here in Australia in 2020. And then at the end of the season, it was like kind of nagging me, my foot, and it genuinely felt like a foot cramp because that's like the area of the foot that it was in. I'm also gonna try and plug my computer in super fast because
Yeah, no worries.
my computer's about to die. We're gonna
Yeah,
see.
I'm at 15%, so we probably got like 20 minutes.
Yeah,
Does that work for
beautiful.
you? All right.
Yeah. Oh no, please. All these cords have to like, oh, this is just a nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah,
Mm.
it makes it tough.
Yeah, we're gonna do our best to please. There we go. Oh wow. Okay, that's gonna look really wonky, but that's all right.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I think the we had between 2020 2021 had the foot injury and essentially got diagnosed. So I got diagnosed when I first got the MRI scan. They looked at the MRI and I still have like all the photos and stuff of it. The doctor here in Australia when I was in Perth playing, he told me he was like and we were like a month and a half or so into the second season. So I was like already I
Mm.
was captaining the team. I was like rocking and rolling. We had just had one of the greatest games I've ever played in my life. Like it was just an incredible second year and we're flying. And then I go in, I'm like, this thing really isn't going away. It's just kind of a niggling pain. It's kind of annoying, all this stuff. And the doctor looks at me and he goes, "You may never run again." And I was like, "No fucking way."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So,
quite a I hate when doctors say shit like that, by the
yeah,
way.
I
The
do too.
amount of doctors that say stuff like they love to just be like the bad guy. I don't know. I
Yeah.
feel I've got some issues with doctors internally. But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's what I got, and the thing that worried me was because it was a navicular stress fracture. So the navicular bone is, not to get super sciencey, but basically the navicular bone is shaped like a cupped hand, and there was a piece of the navicular bone that had totally broken off, and then that piece was like floating around, and then the bigger piece was also fractured and was had some necrosis in it, which is basically bone death. So it looks black,
Yeah.
the MRI.
Wow.
And so he was like, "You probably won't walk again. Like you're definitely not going to be playing soccer anytime soon, all this stuff." And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, have you seen this injury ever? And he was like, I've seen like one case in my life. And I was like, okay, here we go. So we end up sending information back to America. And this is not a commentary on like whether or not Aussie doctors and US doctors are better or worse. That's like they're great in both places. But we sent the MRI information back to some people who I really trust, and my dad, who helped out with this situation, he really trusted because he's been in the medical field before, and so we sent them to those people. And I was able to get into an amazing surgeon who had just done that same surgery. I mean, a little bit different, but same surgery on a Seattle Seahawks player not too
Mm.
long prior, like 3 months ago. And so he had seen that injury and he had seen sort of the start of the rehab and all that stuff. And so I got to admit, part of that mindset shift of, as you described, like, sort of taking it like a champ, so to speak, was literally me being so relieved that I had a future in soccer that it literally, like, that rehab process just didn't matter anymore. Like, I was like, okay,
Yeah.
cool. However long it takes, that's how long it's going to take. I'm not stressed. And
Right.
so, because it's not forever, it's just whatever. It's just like,
Yeah.
X amount of months. And I think when looking at, I've started to get way better at this, I think, recently, but I'm now looking at time investments and resource investments, both like mentally, financially, like all that stuff in decade time periods instead of like season time periods, or like literally like
Mm.
9 month periods. And so instead of being like, oh my God, I'm going to miss next season, it's a tragedy, I shouldn't play anymore because I'm going to be an embarrassment to whatever. Keep in mind, my YouTube had just like started getting big as well. So I was like, I have all these people following me and whatever. But to hear that difference between you'll never walk or play or run again to, oh, it's going to be a probably 6 month recovery, probably even less than that if you take care of it and you do the things that everything you can do. My world was just like, oh, amazing. Okay, I'll miss like one season and maybe 2 seasons, and then I'll be back, and it's totally fine because I'll go play again.
Yeah.
And and then speaking about what I said before about like my mind is to do absolutely everything I possibly can. Like, I was
Right.
in the gym doing every possible exercise I could on a regimented plan. I was swimming like 20,000 meters or like 20 Ks a week in open water in Lake Washington to try and keep like as much cardio shape as possible. I was doing the sauna thing. I was getting PT 3 times a week. I was seeing a podiatrist that was help. Like, I was doing literally everything I possibly can, and came
Yeah.
back probably 2 or 3 times stronger and a better athlete, and mentally, and a football, like all that stuff. I came back way stronger, way better.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's incredible to hear about people coming back from these sort of injuries. Like I've countless friends I know, and just one, for example, my friend Chase Boone, who's playing at Monterey Bay now, he's playing like third or fourth division in Denmark. Then he goes and has a 14-month, 15-month injury from like literally like his patellar tendon coming off. And then he goes from there and signs for the San Diego Loyal and USL Championship. And like you could look at it and be like, how does that make any sense? That you're out of the game for 50, like his first like thing back is a trial. And kind of like what you were talking about, like you feel like you came back. I feel like I came back from my ACL stronger. So it's like you can really decide, how you can, you get to decide how you come back, really, in my opinion. And I think time away from the game, honestly, can be such a powerful thing in that way as well. Gives you perspective about yourself as a player, but also about the game in general. Like, I'm not going to take this thing for granted because, like, it can get just taken out from underneath you at any moment. So, I think it gives you that perspective that some people that never have injuries or never have any setbacks like that don't get.
Yeah. What else do you think? I have a few ideas on this, but what else do you think you gain from having those setbacks? Like, what, or had you
Yeah.
experienced?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of different things. And I think each different injury I've had has taught me something new. And I don't think you need to get injured necessarily to have these
That's not
realizations.
what we're saying.
Yeah, you don't need to like go try to hurt yourself so you can get enlightened. But I'm not saying I'm enlightened, but like to get this clarity on things. But like I think for my ACL, first thing was like I can just play. Like I'm able to go out and have fun and like be with my friends and play the game. Like that was like I was like, I'm never gonna like step on the field again and take it for granted. Like every time I go out there, I'm just gonna like enjoy it. And then the next one, MCL, was like more about like, okay, I was going into this season, things were going really well. I overtrained. And the injury didn't necessarily happen because I overtrained, but I could tell from my performances, the way my body was feeling, I was like, I did way too much going into this season. I didn't take enough rest. The concussions were the hardest, I think, actually, out of all of them, because I saw a direct correlation between how I actually like literally interact with the world with my consciousness and something that happened on a soccer field, which is really scary.
Mm,
Especially being a center back where you're like literally just asked to like head bricks. Like that's your job. And so that gave me perspective in the sense like I need to realize also that there does need to come a certain point where it's like, if this keeps happening, if I continue to feel like this, I need to realize like there has to be a time to step away from the game. Because I don't want to come away from the game punch drunk just because I wanted to play
mm,
for 10 years pro or something like that. Like,
interesting.
and then on top of that, also, like, yeah, so it's kind of like realizing like as much as I love soccer and as much as I'm attached to it and I love it so much, like I'm not gonna kill myself or kill, this gift of life uh or the way I'm interpreting it now because I want to keep heading balls and stuff. But then on top of that, it's like, okay, I need to accept that soccer is going to end at some point is part of that as well. And I also need to realize, like, okay, what can I do to make sure that I can play for as long as I can without putting myself in risk? So then that turns into what investments can I make sure that I'm always going to be like optimal and also like putting my body in the right position. So for me, that was like exploring hyperbaric chamber, exploring getting regular work done by an osteopath on my neck. Cause like the reality is like a guy that hasn't had concussions or hasn't had a surgery or something that maybe they don't need it. But for me, it was like, I will be like, I'm going to have headaches if I don't get my neck worked on regularly. Or like I need to do some other stuff to make sure that NFL guys have cured their CTE by using a hyperbaric chamber. It's like, yeah, I would maybe in the past have taken that money and maybe if I was going out on a Friday, I would have bought beers with it or something. But now I'm putting it back into being in a freaking chamber for an hour. So like, just this was like subtle little changes I think were really big for me because I think if you just keep going back in and doing the same thing over and over, and I'm not saying I've done this perfectly. This is something I still struggle with, especially as someone that wants to keep pushing on. The idea of doing more, more, more is associated with more gains. Whereas sometimes I think, especially when you hit a certain point of your career, it's like less is definitely more. And then how can I utilize that extra time in different ways? So maybe that's visualization, maybe that's doing more work internally to look at the different things that are holding you back in your game. And so I think just and I think without those injuries I would have never even thought that.
Mm.
um I would have just been throttling the pedal down as hard as I could every second of every day to try to keep getting better, better, better. But I think that has diminishing returns. It's like, would you rather be 90 and play every single game of the season or trying to go 110 and you miss half the games? It's kind of what I felt like I was doing.
And concussions are an interesting one too, because it's directly correlated with mental health and just the way
Yeah.
you exist in the world. As you said, right? Like your consciousness is altered because
Yeah.
of this injury. And so that's got to be head injuries in particular have to be an incredible weight on the mental side of like how differently you cope with something like that versus an ankle injury or a knee injury or something where you can think clearly and you can sort of convince yourself out of some of the catastrophic thought patterns versus you have a concussion and even thinking straight can be a challenge.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, that's what I was thinking when I was concussed. I was like, I wish I just had an ankle sprain. Like, or I wish I did something else. Like, because right now I'm not even me. I'm like
Mm.
a shell of myself. I feel like I'm hungover for 24 hours of the day, and I don't know when it's gonna end, and that's really scary. Um, so, and I was really lucky at Gonzaga. The trainer there, her name is Jackie Heeman. She was amazing with me, and the other thing too is like you're not really in control of your emotions as well. Like I remember I was like trying to get myself to go outside, trying to get myself to do like normal activities, and I was ordering a black coffee and I just started crying. Like, and she was like, "Whoa!" Like either he really wants this coffee, or like he's terrified I'm gonna put. I don't know what's going on, but like, and yeah, that's a thing. It. Those are the types of things as well where people are like, "All right, maybe I'll just hang it up," because that's the other side of it that people don't see as well. Um, but yeah, definitely one of the most difficult things I've had to go through in my career.
It's a dark place to be in, I think. And there's an interesting spot where I think and this is maybe you can speak on this a little bit as well, but let me work through this thought process. Like the transition of okay, you've accepted you're injured, and let's sort of take concussions out of it just because obviously that's a totally different like alteration, but you get injured with your knee or the hernia or the foot or whatever it is, and you've transitioned into a sort of a mode of acceptance, and I'm doing my rehab and I'm doing all this other stuff. And for some people, that's all they have to do. So fair enough. For most people and most pros, you probably have a family life. You probably have a girlfriend or a boyfriend. You probably have family responsibilities. You might have also work outside. Like I have work stuff. You have work stuff outside of your football. And so
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're sitting in this injured place, and this is just like the nature of the way that intentionality works in whatever you're doing. But because you're allocating more mental energy towards these other things, because you're in your rehab and you're doing your job there, but you have all this, you're not performing, you don't have to compete, you don't have to think about what the coach thinks of you, you don't have to think about like any of that stuff. And so once you've switched into that like rehab mode, all of a sudden, at least this has been my experience, the other things in your life start to move forward in a way that's really positive and awesome. And you're like,
Mm,
wait, whoa, this is like a different reality from what I'm used to. Like, oh my God, my work's going crazy well, and my relationship is all of a sudden bouncing off the walls, and my girlfriend seems to want to hang out with me more. And like, oh my God, like there's all this stuff.
yeah.
And that can be, I think, a really interesting pivot point to where not only is that helping you understand and sort of detach your who you are as a person with football and soccer, but also it's allowing you to say soccer's something that I do, and I'm going to be stronger if I choose to go through with this rehab and continue to play, because not only do I have the awareness that, oh, actually I'm more than just a soccer player. I can do all these other things that are in really well. I can do the relationship thing. I can do the life thing. I can do the work thing. And you have that ability to sort of take a step back and have, you said about perspective, like you really get, you sort of take the blinders off and be like, wow, I can make other things in this world happen, which is really excellent, as opposed to, I think a lot of us are stuck for the majority of our careers in freaking out because all we feel like we can offer to the world is our performances with a football.
Yeah. No, you totally nailed it there. You just took the words out of my brain that I didn't know how to say. Because that's really what it is like you get so strung into this idea of like this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what other people think of me. This is how I provide value to myself and others. And then once that's stripped away, obviously it's really painful at the beginning. But then you're like, I'm able to operate now a day-to-day basis without having to be dictated by how I played in small sided in the morning, which is a
Yeah.
crazy thing. And then that's the other thing. I think that's what led to kind of more of the self exploration of how can I feel like that even when I am playing? Like, how can I detach? This is like further down the line, and some people don't ever want to try to do that. But I would love to just detach completely from my soccer player, Angelo, and be able to exist in the world as just Angelo after the session ends. But I mean, you can, it's a very, it's so hard to do that. And there's very few people that are able to do that. So it's much easier said than done. Um, but no, I think you see yourself in a different light once you get injured, and I think it does take a burden off a lot of people's shoulders.
And talking about the example that you used of Chase as well, I think that's it in a lot of ways. Those moments can be turned into superpowers because I would say that I am 10 times the player that I was before the hernia. And I'm probably another 3 or 4 or 5 times better than the player I was before the foot injury. And the
Right.
reason for that is because you have that superpower of, well, I'm me. I'm the whole piece of the pie. I'm not just this one tiny sliver. And so if I have a crap training session, beautiful. It's a learning opportunity. It's not the end of the
Mhm.
world anymore because I've got all this other stuff that I have going on for me that then I'm able to push into, or I'm able to, sort of take my time to mentally switch off from the football. Or even if it's, in Chase's case, it's like he's able to take, and I would love to have him on the podcast because I want to ask him about this. And
Yeah,
I would predict that he was able to take all of that injury time. He's able to jump into some other things. He's able to see the game in a different way that he wouldn't have if he was playing and all this stuff. He's able to like really learn and grow into his own self and be more confident. And so then there's this like kind of beautiful double-edged sword of like, number one, if it all ends today, if I can never play again, if I now choose intentionally to go back into soccer full time, that's an amazing thing. And I have all this like pent up energy that I'm like, okay, boom, it's a waterfall. We're gonna hit it hard. And also you have the other side of that blade, which is, and you know what? If it all ended tomorrow, I'm gonna be okay. And I'm gonna
yeah,
be fine.
100%, hundred
And
percent.
that's totally different than I have everything to lose, and so you're playing scared as opposed to playing empowered.
100%. I think you said that so well. I mean, it's the double-edged sword. Like, no matter what happens, I'm still gonna be Noah at the end of this training session, at the end of this game. Versus my entire identity is worth this passing drill. And if I fuck up, I am not worthy of existing. And I think I have been in that mode for so long. And I think a lot of that comes back to my conditioning from the clubs I played for when I was younger. But like
Yeah,
I
right.
think it's such a crazy thing when your eyes open to that. It kind of reminds me of a lot of stories you hear with people where it's like maybe they got released from a club or they've had something happen like an injury and they're just like, you know what, I don't really care anymore. Whatever. I've kind of let go of the idea. And someone's like, oh, you have a trial. And it's like, all right, I'll just go play. And then that's the best experience I've ever had. And then you go back into control after that. It's like, oh, how do I recreate that? What did I eat? What did I do to make everything? Oh, I didn't care. All right, I'm gonna listen to reggae before the game. It's like that's not you. Like now you're just back into controlling. So I mean, it's so complex but so simple at the same time. Um, but yeah, very very interesting stuff. Now we're into the sports psychology.
Yeah, what a beautiful analogy for the game of football. So complicated yet so simple.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting one. I find that injuries bring a lot out of people, and you really can understand and see where character is in those moments.
Hmm.
And I think you can really and take judgment away from it. Like it doesn't matter what I think of some, if you get injured tomorrow and you act X amount of what, like whatever the way you act, I'm not judging you for it, but it is objectively an indication to me of like, okay, what's under the hood? Like what's under the hood of that soccer player that is a savage on the field and is commanding at the back and who's a center back and all the things that make Angelo Calfo the soccer player that Angelo Calfo is. Under
Right.
that facade, under that thing, I see so much character come out when And you and I experienced this last year at Flower City. You could
Yeah.
see when guys got injured what happened.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not judging them positively or negatively. I'm just saying, oh, interesting. Wow, okay. That tells me a lot
Yeah.
about their character.
Definitely. I mean, you see a lot about people when they're in their lowest moments. And it's a lot easier said than done. And I think there's also something to be said for people are doing the best that they can in certain moments. So it's like if you haven't had those experiences in the past where you've got injured, maybe the first time you fall off the wagon, you drink for 3 days, and you need that experience. So the next time you get injured, you're swimming in the lake with Noah, you know? So I think it's it's really tough these things when they, especially when they, so much of who you think you are is dependent on it. But if you're able to shift that into like, now how I act is the true version of myself. And then you take it outside of soccer, you take that into the business world, you take that wherever something comes up, deal falls through. It's like, are you gonna go MIA on your team for 4 days because something bad happened? And that seems like a much smaller thing compared to when you're in the soccer world. So it's just an example of how amazing sports can be as a life lesson.
Yeah. So let's reel it back to just injuries in general, maybe specific to the collegiate experience, but how do you find that your treatment plans, your I'll call it we'll call them the dailies, right? Like so the things that you do, the prehab that you do before every session, all that stuff, how has that changed over time since those injuries have occurred?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I've gone through so many different things because partially like I was willing to do anything to play at the highest or the best version of myself. Like if somebody told me you needed to scoop out a bunch of mud from the grass and like bathe yourself in it before training. Like I would do literally anything they told me to, like if I thought it was gonna help me. So I think it's changed over a lot of time, but I think most of it will just come down to consistency. And I think the basics are super important. Like there was a time at Flower City where I was sleeping probably like 6 to 7 nights a week or 6 or 7 hours a night. And
Only
six to
six
seven
nights a week.
6 nights a week I was sleeping. 6 to 7 hours a night. But then I was hopping in the hyperbaric chamber and then I was going in the sauna and I was doing all these extra things. But it's like if you're not nailing your sleep, like that stuff's not important. So I think
Yeah.
doing the like stretching after sessions and then also like figuring out like for me, I've got a hamstring graft. So I need to make sure that I'm doing some hamstring activation before session start. Maybe Johnny doesn't need to do that, but I do. So I'm going to do it. So kind of going back to what we've talked about before, like you need to know what's best for you and you need to execute that. So maybe the strength coach is trying to get you guys to, or whoever is trying to get you guys to do sprints right off the gate or whatever. You got to know yourself and be like, look, like if I do that, I'm fucked. I'm not going to play the best or I'm not going to allow myself to engage in this activity to my fullest extent if I don't do what I need to take care of. So, and I think everybody's got, because there's some guys rock up. Like there's a guy on my team here. He gets to the session hour and a half early, doesn't stretch, he just goes out and starts shooting. And it's like, imagine what would happen to my body if I did that. So everybody's different. But for me, like it comes down to basics, knowing yourself and what your needs are, and then executing that daily.
If
What
you're
about what about you?
Yeah, really quick follow up on that one. If you're somebody, so let's imagine somebody's listening to this or watching this that is not injured. They have they're feeling really good, they're healthy, but they want to maximize their potential.
Mm,
What are maybe Angelo's five basics that you would say like, hey, here's your starting point to like nail in before anything else happens?
right. Okay. I got a couple good ones. So you don't need to buy a whoop. Just go to bed 9 hours before you need to wake up. Because if you go to bed 8 hours before, you'll probably sleep like 6.5. Get in bed, turn off electronics by like 2 hour, an hour before that, and give yourself 9 hours in bed without a phone or anything distracting you. And you'll be golden on sleep. Like 8 hours, I don't think is enough if you're a student athlete. Like try to go for 9. So that's the first thing. Second thing, I would be like trying to set up, maybe if you struggle with consistency, do 30 days straight of foam rolling it, before your session and then yoga at night. 30 days, just hit it out and it's going to become a habit. But if you do that every single day, it doesn't need to be for 30 minutes. It'd be like 10 minutes of foam rolling before a session, 15 minutes of stretching at night. And then you can build that up if you need to, but you'll feel a massive difference if you're not already doing that. Um, and then I'll just leave it at 3. I think if you're getting the urge, like, I need to go out and do all this shooting, I need to go out and do this, that, and the other, like, to make sure I'm okay to play, you already know how to do it. You're at the college level. Like, you know how to pass, you know how to shoot. You already have all the technical abilities, but you think you need to go out and prove to yourself that you're already good enough. Replace that with visualization. So do 10 minutes before you go to bed, 10 minutes in the morning, whatever you want to do, of all those actions you want to see yourself doing, and just feel yourself doing it the way you want to do it. That's more important than the actual visualization. And replace that and see how your game changes. Because for me, like when I had the concussion, I did that every single day for 30 minutes while I was injured. And I came back and had like one of the best games of my career, like 2 days after getting cleared. And that's things people don't talk about. They're like, you got to work, work, work. But it's like, are you going to get a hernia because you've hit 40 free kicks, or could you be much more efficient with your time?
Absolutely. Those are great ones. Those are really great ones. Um, I would say sleep is a big one. People don't understand how good sleep is. For context on your point about visualization, for those of you who don't know, your brain can't tell the difference between a period like a 30 minutes or even 10 minutes of a visualization of an action and the actual physical body doing that action. So at when you are training as much as student athletes train, being mindful of where your limit is of what your body can and can't handle, you shouldn't feel sore all the time. That's called overtraining. That's a very, very clear symptom of overtraining. And so usually using that visualization, your brain's going to be able to essentially start to build those neuro pathways without actually doing the physical action and tiring your body out. So that's just the context behind that comment, because I think that's something that is so immensely powerful for people, but is so undervalued and underused, especially in the collegiate game, because they're like, well, I can't sit still for 30 minutes because I have homework to do or I have whatever. It's like, well, maybe those 400 free kicks you took, you know, completely not warming up are, maybe that's just not the best, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So yeah, I think maybe to wrap up my couple would be, and these will overlap quite a bit. I think just because that's just the way. I mean, that's basics are basics. Like it's sort of the fundamentals. Um, the the biggest things for injury prevention for me are going to be sleep, they're going to be mobility, they're going to be the make sure you're warming up properly. So whatever you need to feel like your body's warm. I used to juggle to and from training every day in college from my house, which was like probably 400 or 500 meters. So I used to juggle, an extra 1,000 times a day, but it was just at walking pace. So it was like that was like my warm up. And I just like kind of walked and juggled, did some band exercises to activate when I got to the field. But like number one, I got a bunch of touches in at really low impact to my body. So it was great. But it was also just like a way to sort of get your body moving in a slow pace. So make sure you're warming up properly. And then the last thing I would add is nutrition is a really big thing. And we'll do a whole episode on how to eat properly as a college athlete because it's very difficult, especially when you're on campus and you've got a meal plan. But that's sort of that's sort of where we're at. So we're going to wrap up today's episode. As you can see, Angelo's probably going to be dipping out pretty soon here. I think his computer's getting all shut off, but that's sort of a good idea of what some injuries and some mindsets and stuff look like through injury and how to prevent them. And we'll of course start to expand on these topics. I mean, we could literally talk about this for hours and hours and hours. But we'll wrap it up here. Hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. Make sure you follow us on all the socials, which will be down in the description box below. You guys can find us at Brace App on most platforms, and we will see you guys in the next one.